I'm Maurice Coleman. Welcome to the Information Gone Wild podcast brought to you by the San José State University iSchool. I'm one of your hosts.
I'm Paul Signorelli, obviously another one of your hosts on this podcast, where we describe all things library and information science.
Today, we are fortunate to have as our guest Dr. Sandra Hirsh. Sandra, in addition to serving as an Associate Dean for Academics in the College of Information, Data and Society at San José State University, also serves as a special advisor to the Provost on AI curricular initiatives and is the editor of Library 2035, Imagining the Next Generation of Libraries.
Welcome, Sandy. We're delighted to have you with us to talk about the work you're doing through the book, your work at San Jose State University, and your contributions to the library community through so many of the committees you've served on in the American Library Association and other associations.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with talking about your background in libraries. What first inspired you to seek out a career in libraries? And then I want to throw a softball at you, Sandy, that we like to ask all of our guests. What brings you happiness?
Well, the way I got involved in libraries is actually through my mom. My mom was herself a librarian, and she's the one who really inspired me to pursue my degree in library and information science. I grew up in the field with her, and she used to take us to all the libraries and to the library conferences as a kid. But that actually wasn't what inspired me to become a librarian. In fact, that sort of turned me off a little bit because I thought, oh, I don't really want to do what my mom is doing. However, when I finished my undergraduate degree at UCLA in political science, everybody at that time was going to law school. And I knew 100% that law school was not for me. And so my mom chimed in again and she's like, Sandy, you might consider going to library school because everything that you learn in library school will be useful to you no matter what else you decide to do.
Wow.
And also it would give you skills that would make you employable for some work. And I didn't have any other better ideas. So that's why I went to library school, but I loved it. And so here I am still all these years later in the library field.
All right, and what brings you happiness?
Well, that's a great question. I think kind of like to break that up into what brings me happiness in my career versus maybe outside of that as well. When I think about what brings me happiness in my job or the work that I'm doing, it's about having the opportunity to have and make impact and have influence, really making a difference. And I think that's part of what attracts me to being in the library and information science education space, but it's also impacted my other decisions, even when I was working outside of libraries. I really love the opportunity to help mentor people and help people grow and help drive the profession forward as well. So I think that those things really bring me happiness. And I also really am happy when I'm continuing myself to learn and grow and have new opportunities, like this new opportunity that I have being the special advisor to the Provost on AI curricular initiatives. It's an opportunity to kind of advance my own thinking and my own growth and development. And outside of work, what brings me happiness is my family. Spending time with them is really important. I'm a new grandma, and so they live a block from me. So I see my granddaughter practically every day, and then doing things I love, like road cycling and traveling, and exploring new places. So it's the balance of striking the right balance between those. It also brings me joy when I can.
I think that's very important as a person who's so high up in the profession that that's a good thing for our students at San Jose State is to really say, look, Sandra, she's doing it too. Remember, balance. You need balance with your work and life.
You really do. And it's hard to achieve. And I'm not saying I always hit it on work, but I really try hard to keep in mind what's really important. At the end of the day, it's really my family and my personal connections that make a difference and having some societal impacts. But career is important too. But I do a lot of that also because I find it really rewarding and as well. So it also gives me joy.
So career is important. Have you already helped your granddaughter to put in her application to San Jose State University School?
No, but she already has it. She's already had 2 different Spartan outfits that she's growing out of. So
that's a good start.
Yes, she could be a future Spartan.
On a more serious note, when you were talking to Maurice a minute ago, you mentioned the usefulness of what you learn in library school, the lessons your mother passed on to you. That's an issue that many of us have seen where we may not be working in libraries anymore, but those skills are so important, so useful. Can you say something for our students and our peers about how you see translating library level skills into other professions and how they can keep their eyes open to being as adaptable as they can in the environment we're in?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I've thought a lot about and actually has helped influence. I've tried to bring that into the School of Information when I became the director there. And it also is evident in the textbook that I wrote, Information Services Today, an introduction, where I really tried to bring out some of those pieces. I like to think about, I think originally inspired by the words of my mom, who said that those skills would be useful no matter what. She was really prophetic in what she said at that time, because when you think about what we're trained to do, we're trained to organize information, look at how authentic information is, how to find it effectively, how to help others find that information, how to train. All of these skills are things that are useful no matter what profession you're in or what skills, whatever work you're doing. And so I've personally have applied those skills into different careers outside of libraries. For example, applying my skills related to research and understanding the user need and translating that into user experience research at Microsoft and at LinkedIn. And I found that those skills were very transferable and that there were many things that translate over into that other kind of work that was really useful. And I actually found the kind of training that we have in library and information science, which I always think of as being the original user focused profession, that it does translate really well over to user experience research, even though that discipline tends to be more populated from a human factor standpoint. But we bring the user to the center of everything that we do.
You mentioned your book Information Services Today. Also, we talked a bit in the opening about Library 2035, and you've also co-written a book on blockchain. What initially drew you to serving as an editor, and how does writing and editing contribute overall to the work you do in the library community?
So interesting. Sometimes you seek out opportunities, and sometimes opportunities seek you out. And actually, I don't know that I came to it thinking, oh, I'm going to be an editor for all these books. Although I do come it by it honestly, since my mom was a prolific editor of and writer of reference books, so maybe it was
Uh,
in my genetic
it's
materials
it's a
to begin
family
with.
business, Sandy. It's a
It
family
is.
business. That's what it is.
I don't think I fell too far from the
No,
tree.
you did. No, you did not.
But I think that when I became the director of the School of Information, I had the good fortune of getting to know Charles Harmon, who was working at Rowman and Littlefield. And he was met with me from time to time, and he would throw ideas out at me about trying to get me to write a book about some one thing or another. And sometimes he'd ask me what I wanted, and sometimes he'd come with some ideas. And one time he came to me with the idea for putting together a foundational textbook for the library and information field. And we discussed it, and he said, yeah, it could be an edited work. And I'm like, what, didn't really feel prepared to actually write a whole book by myself. But I thought,
Uh-huh.
I could potentially do editing, and I actually started to have a vision of how that could work and what I would be able to bring to the conversation that might be a little different than some of the perspectives that already existed out there. And that is how that idea for the book for Information Services Today, an introduction, came. Although the idea that he came to me with was a much more traditional viewpoint, really very library focused, very bricks and mortar kind of approach. And I said, well, I want to take it a different direction. I want to think about not just the physical aspect of it, but also the virtual services and opportunities. I want to not just think about it in terms of the skills that we're preparing for people to work in the libraries of today, but also what we might need to think about for the libraries of tomorrow, and also how we might prepare people who are working in other applying those information skills outside of libraries. So I took the idea that he brought me and shaped it in a way that I felt was how I was excited to think about the field and how I thought it would be useful to represent that to students and preparing the next generation of information professionals. So that's how that got started. And actually, he came back to me again years later with the idea of doing the next, which led to this book, Library 2035. Joe Janes had done the earlier version of that, Library 2020. Joe didn't want to do the next edition. I guess recommended me. Charles came to me, would you like to do this book? And I said, yes, of course. That sounded so exciting. I was very excited for this book. I again had a vision of how I would build upon what Joe had done because he had done such a great job, but also bring my own approach to it with the webcast interviews and some of the other changes I made. But it's again, that kind of came to me. So I've been fortunate with some of these opportunities to have some of them come to me, but I've been picky about the ones I've taken on because I really wanted to have a clear sense of what I would bring to the conversation.
You mentioned Charles Harmon. Let's make his ears ring in the most positive here, as I
Yeah.
too have had the opportunity to work with
He's the
him.
best.
He really is. Charles, I hope you're getting a chance to watch this. I had a similar experience to what you had when Charles first came to me with a book idea. We started talking about something very basic, and he was so careful listening to what I said. And at one point, when I talked about how I'd gone off in a different direction from the topic we were talking about, he says, well, tell me about that. And that evolved in a half-hour conversation, the original proposal that he was asking me to pursue, into something that was much more exciting to me. For our peers who are writing or editing, and for students who see writing as part of librarianship, can you describe a little bit of that relationship with an editor, what to look for, and what a great editor does to make your work pop?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summarized some of it. I think some of the things that I appreciate is the listening and the openness to different perspective. As I said, the what he came to me with was a little different than what I ended up just what I pitched back to him. And but he was really receptive and we had some really good conversations. We had a very long conversation around what the title of the book should be for information services today and in introduction because it was trying to be encompassing, but just it was a hard title to come up with. So we threw around lots of different ideas before we landed on one that we both felt good about. And so I appreciated that opportunity to have that kind of conversation. Also, somebody, when I've run into problems with certain authors, maybe dropping out kind of late in the process and scrambling to fill gaps in the publisher can be helpful with things like that. The responsiveness, I think, is really important. Good communication, deadlines, and everybody staying on top of those deadlines. Sometimes publishers can hold you to a deadline, but then they're not so great about their own deadlines, or it can be really hard to get regular communication or know how to expedite things. So I think some of those things are some of the things I look for in a publisher and that I would like to see continue.
All right, Sandra, let's talk about you as editor now of an anthology. What's the most challenging thing to you serving as an editor of an anthology?
So one of the challenges has been just identifying who you want to contribute to the book and identifying what that person would contribute. So for it's a little different for like the textbook that I did where I have specific topics that I already know I want to include, let's say about reference or about, project management or whatever the topic is. Sometimes I know exactly who I want to invite for that conversation. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I have too many people I want to choose from, and it's hard for me to decide which one I want. And so that can be one set of challenges, but also it can be challenging if you are looking for a specific niche person and then that person either isn't available or it can be hard sometimes to find somebody else. In the Library 2035 book, that one was really challenging, even more challenging than the textbook because
Really?
because I really wanted to have a diversity of perspectives and I really tried hard not to, some of the people that Joe included in his book in 2020 were people I would have thought of too. So I'm like, oh, I can't just use some of the same all those people because they're already given their view. I need to have fresh voices. And so I did have a couple people I pulled over from his book into my book, and namely Joe James himself. I thought it was a nice continuity from the old to the new, but balance, let's say across 25 chapters, all the different ways I wanted to represent people's perspectives, whether it's by geography, whether it is by how long they've been in the field, and from I wanted to bring in some newer voices and people who were well known in the field. I wanted to bring in diversity of background, different types of libraries. You start slicing and dicing in that way, and it becomes very hard to have a good balance, and men and women, just all the different factors. I wanted, actually, I really wanted this book to be international, is what I wanted at first. I really want, because I bring a global lens to pretty much everything I do, and I quickly realized that was impossible because I couldn't slice and dice 25 chapters and then
Right.
also add in different regions of the world on top of that. So I quickly eliminated that idea, and Joe didn't do that either. So I felt I was in good company that way. So
Okay.
then I went back to trying to just keep it to the US and trying to balance things in that. I think that's what made it really challenging. I wanted to make sure I had representation on certain topics. Like I wanted something on privacy, and I wanted something, for example, in sustainability, environment, just because I felt those were so important. But the way I posed the question was so broad ended that I couldn't dictate to them exactly what they were going to talk about for the future of libraries. So I invited a couple people who I knew would by default talk about those topics.
That was
So
very smart of you. Very smart.
As I've read through the information services today in its three editions, and obviously Library 2035, it strikes me that what you've done magnificently is pulled into a book the kind of people we would love to have at a party where we could just sit down and chat and pick brains. They're just wonderful. As you read through the submissions that came in through some of our best colleagues out there, were there any surprises to you in terms of what they were seeing and discussing?
I wouldn't say exactly that there were surprises that I encountered. I think what was a little surprising to me was some of the consistency of some of the themes that emerged across the chapters, and particularly with regard to the important role that libraries will continue to play in their communities. It's not to say that everybody, thought everything was going to be perfect and positive, but there was a strong sense that libraries were essential to the community, and that would continue well into the future. By the year 2035, we would be even more essential. And so I thought that strong community focus was really interesting, and probably the strongest theme that I saw across the book, because I did have a whole part of the book that was devoted to that, like really resonated with the community theme directly, but it was very pervasive across all the chapters. And I think that the another aspect that I think emerged pretty strongly from the book that I thought was interesting was the focus on relationships and partnerships, and that need to partner and to collaborate to ensure our joint success, that we can't really do it all on our own as libraries. We need to establish those partnerships and work together to be successful. And then I think the other piece that I think was a little interesting, and maybe it's a little surprising, is the importance, especially coming from a library field, but that the importance of co-creating content, that really listening to the community, reflecting that, but in that co-creation of services or even some of the content that's represented in the libraries. I think that was another important aspect that I thought was interesting to see and move throughout the chapters. And then, I mean, there's obviously, as I said, it wasn't all positive. There were lots of concerns that were surfaced around intellectual freedom challenges and barriers in publishing, and concerns around general appreciation for libraries overall and technology threats, etc. But at the end of the day, I felt that despite those uncertainties or those known issues, there was just this general sense of optimism for the future that most people walked away with. And I thought that was reassuring and interesting to see.
Anything completely surprised you? I mean, just you picked up, you read it, you went, what? Any of the essays in the book had that kind of impact on you?
As I said, it was less about that kind of an impact and more like what I was just saying in terms of seeing some of these kinds of commonalities across. There were a few of the chapters that really stuck with me. One of them, I think, if you read Erin Berman's chapter 4, I think the way that she approached the privacy topic, I think was really memorable. It was a really effective way of surfacing some of the pitfalls and the ways that we can get lured into giving away our privacy and some of the perils that you face as a result. And I think that was really important. And so I think that would be one of the ones I would pull out. But there's so many chapters that are so interesting for different kinds of reasons that I could go on. But I'm going to stick with Erin for now.
I think there's so many of those chapters. We could be here for the next 4 or 5 hours, which would be fine by me, but I'm just going to say straight up to people, we're going to cover a few of the chapters and ask Sandy about some of the stuff that we saw in there. But if you want to get the whole thing, really read the book, look at the interviews that she's got posted with links in that book. Let's focus on one that comes early on. Dave Lankes, who is currently the Virginia and Charles Bowden Professor of Librarianship at the University of Texas in Austin, contributed the article, "There is no future of libraries. There are many." Would you mind talking a little bit about that concept of multiple futures and what our students and peers can do to help shape those futures?
Yeah, I think that was another chapter I was going to pull out to mention that I think had a really interesting perspective in how he is approaching how libraries need to evolve for the future. And what he talks a lot about is the importance of allowing libraries to fracture. That's his language. And I take that to mean the need to give libraries the flexibility to specialize and adapt to the unique needs and wants of their communities that they're serving. And what he specifically is talking about is that with some of the standards and some of the kind of training and approaches that sometimes it can feel that there's supposed to be a one size fits all for all types of libraries and that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And he's arguing more that it may make sense for one library to focus on more technology access or cultural preservation, and because that's would best align with the needs of their community, while another library might prioritize community wellness or something else, because that might make sense for the needs of a different community. And so basically, he talks about the concept of fracturing that allows libraries to reimagine themselves in light of their community's needs instead of that just one size fits all. So that's the idea. So I think that if we think about what that means for students and for information professionals generally, then I think that because he's talking about making sure that you understand the needs of your local community and the setting and the environment that you're in, that it will be really important to cultivate the skills and knowledge so that you will be in a good position to have that deep understanding of your community needs. So I think that that's one important aspect in listening, understanding, and attuning what you're delivering to the needs of your community. And that goes back to what I said from the very beginning about us being a user-centered field. And I've always felt that. And David does a beautiful job of really representing the user as the community at large and making sure that we're designing and delivering what the local community needs in order to be effective and successful. So I think that's what will be important for students to master, is that understanding of their community needs and making sure that they really know how then to translate that into delivering services, resources, and the like to be able to address those needs.
For those who are interested in Dave's work, I'm happy to say Dave was the first person we interviewed in this podcast series. So if you want more from Dave, you can go back to episode 1 of Information Gone Wild. Also, we're recording this in July 2025. He just put out a wonderful new book called Triptych. So plenty of carryover from what he wrote for Sandy's edition and plenty of carryover from what we've done in the past.
As part of your book, you have obviously a lot of different essays. What I liked is the tie between different sections. For example, former ALA President Patty Wong In her piece, The Library as Community Enthusiast Champion Advocate tells us that libraries need to re-examine how to engage with their communities and users. This means focusing on community conversations, ensuring social justice and equity, diversity, and inclusion in libraries. And later on, under the big title Equity and Inclusion, Professor Dr. Nicole Cook, who's the endowed chair and professor at the University of South Carolina, suggests not having an equity foundation and lens creates a huge chasm and discrepancy between the work we do in the name of equity and the work we do to sustain equity. In her article, equity is a necessary foundation. All that being said, and given the increasingly strong opposition we are experiencing in libraries towards diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging from our current federal administration, what advice would you and your contributors offer to students and others in the information field on the topic of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at this point?
That's a great question. And first of all, I just want to thank you for making the connections between the different parts of the book. Since the question that I posed to the contributors was so broad, just like, what do you think the future of libraries will be? They could have addressed it from any way. I artificially and after the fact classified them into those different sections, which
Okay.
was really hard to do because they had so many different themes embedded in each. So I'm glad you pulled together those different parts from different sections in the book. I think that's a really important question that you're asking, and and also an incredibly challenging question for the reasons that you surfaced. That said, I would say that my overarching advice in this area is that we need to stay grounded in what is at our core. We need to be true to our core mission of libraries, which is providing access and equity and providing learning and empowerment to our communities. And so I think that we need to constantly go back to what our core mission is and our core values of what we stand for. But I know that's hard, and there's a lot of challenges to this, and I think that it's a very nuanced question that you're asking, and you'll have to, of course, apply things in ways that make sense for your local communities. But I think it's important as we are in this kind of environment that we are, just to continue to recognize that diversity, equity, inclusion it's not an add-on. It's still central to build, and we still need equitable information ecosystems. And I think that it's still really important for us to be thinking, how do we meet the needs of all the constituents in our communities? And I think one of the ways that we can hopefully address some of the challenging environment that we find ourselves in is to continue to look for and build connections with various allies and to create positive, safe spaces for community conversations, and to make sure that we are engaging with our in communities in ways that invite some of these conversations. And that can be challenging and definitely fraught, but it also can be done successfully. And I think that also gets into some of the things that some of our contributors talked about in terms of the discussions around co-designing services and programs, and having some multilingual outreach opportunities and other practices that ground libraries in that sense of trust and belonging. So I think hopefully redirecting some of the conversations back into a positive conversation around understanding, compassion, and empathy will hopefully help us have a move into a common area of agreement and understanding. And so I think the other thing that we need to be doing, and I think this is important for students and for all of us, is to be equipping ourselves with the tools to help us navigate some of the challenges in this landscape, whether that's like understanding how to be the principles of advocacy and how do we do that effectively, and how do we build coalitions, and how do we engage in understanding policy. So I think some of those kinds of tools and will be useful to students to help them be successful in navigating what is clearly a challenging time for libraries as a whole and for our profession right now.
Thank you. One, thank you for the mention of advocacy. I keep hearing our colleagues say more and more that if you're a librarian, you're an advocate by definition because you're working for your community. Dave talks about that in his new book. Two, thanks again for responding to the questions about Patty Wong and Nicole Cook. Again, for those of you watching the podcast, we've interviewed both of them. So this feels like a continuation of the same party we've been having now for about 16 or 17 months here in Information Gone Wild. I urge you to go back and look at those. Another person that we know and that you included in the book, Veranda Pitchford, is a wonderful person who serves as assistant director for the Khalifa Group here in California. In my opinion, she contributed one of the most stunningly insightful articles, and that's not a slam on anybody else, but just reading Veranda's words there took the conversation we've had over a long period of time to a whole different level. She explores the upsides and the downsides of Cultural Heritage Month activities in libraries. And quoting her, she reminds us we must avoid cultural objectification and cultural booty calls, which of course made me laugh. You put that in your article, avoiding cultural booty calls and instead keep the community's core cultural heritage in mind when developing programs throughout the year. Would you mind summarizing the problems she identifies and talk about what we can learn from that article in terms of this month we're celebrating you, this month we're celebrating that group, and how do we keep that as an ongoing thing rather than spotlight of the month, which denigrates people?
Yeah, so she definitely won for uh the most catchy title, or the most like, what is she talking about? I have to read that chapter. So I think all of the contributors would agree, like, wait, what did she just say? So that was great. Yeah, but I loved it. I thought it was a great title. And also, as you said, Paul, really an insightful chapter that surfaced something I think that was really important, because as you were talking about, uh, even with the best intentions, we may not be doing right by our communities when we assume we know what their cultural interests or traditions are, and we try to represent them without engaging them in the conversation. And that's kind of what she was talking about in her chapter, about how we may be missing the mark a little bit in some of the efforts that we're doing, and that we need to do better. And so we don't want to be at making those assumptions. We don't want to risk turning away or offending community members by just doing these on our own, that we really need to engage our community as co-creators, as co-designers of some of these activities, and build these programs with them and learning from them. So I think that being aware of that and building that, again, that those skills related to engaging with our community and not making those assumptions that we just know what they need or what they'll want, that treating our community as partners, I think, is just a really core skill. That whole partnership, those listening skills, the communication skills, that outreach to the community, and then being open to that kind of idea that we don't have to just be the providers. We can be the partners and working together and be collaborators. I think all of those aspects and those skills, some of them are just soft skills, but they're super important in today's environment. And I think that will serve our future library workers really well if we can do a good job and keep that in mind, that that's what we're there for, is to work together as part of the community.
And speaking about working together, being part of the community, I want to turn our attention to an article by Annie Norman. The library in 2035 will be universal. You talk about the sense of community. Her article really strives the importance of working together in all sorts of ways with other libraries, not just public libraries, not just academic libraries, not just school libraries, to have almost a harmonic convergence of libraries as just, the working together of the power of every single library, big L, big tent, to get together. What did you think when you saw this? And then I pulled out one of the word that stuck to me is service as part of your collection. What a
Mhm.
powerful way to think about the way you, because we serve the public in so many different ways, but to really think of it as a collection to manage. What can our future librarians that we are training here at San Jose State take from something like that, and some of the skills they can work with other coalitions, collaborations, and other groups? What can they take away from that article?
I'm really glad that you surfaced what she said, and some of the ways that you presented her points, I think, are really important. I just want to circle back to one of the things that you said that I completely agree with. I do feel that our field tends to over silo ourselves. That, oh, I'm an academic librarian. My needs are different than a public librarian, which are different than a school librarian, which is true. You do have some different needs and different constituencies and different pressures and different expectations, that's for sure. But we all came from the same place. We all came from
Right.
the same degree program. And so when we go and apply for jobs, just because I worked in an academic library doesn't mean I shouldn't be able to have some transferable skills to a public library or vice versa. And so I think we do have this over siloing approach to
Yes,
our
yes.
thinking that I don't think is helpful. But that wasn't your point of your question. Your question was something else. I got very fixated on that
No,
aspect.
no, not look, the point really it's about the idea of working with, all the different, and I usually not a loss of words. It's, different regional libraries or state libraries, how getting everyone into the big library tent is going to be vital to, and that this came in other articles too about, advocacy or standing up for others. Dr. Cook's article, hey, you have to be authentic and be there for other people. It's again, you have a lot of different. You didn't give them specific things, but all the same themes came in.
They did.
It's really encouraging. Working with the regional library. Yeah, why? The whole state, Delaware is trying to become one big library, and the power in that. What can people learn, and what have you seen working with and writing other books about library and information science, the power of collaboration with other libraries? You talked a little bit about it because we over silo, but I don't know if some get really the power of working with us, with people who are archivists who work in non-traditional library settings can have easily, as you mentioned, Sandy, from your time at LinkedIn, etc., easily transferable skills to any library.
They
What can
can.
our students pull from working with uh, bigger library agencies?
I could approach this so many different ways, but I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think that there, we need to, we need to be partnering and collaborating. I think if we over silo or just like stick to our own, we're gonna not have the power that we need to raise our voices collectively to advocate for the kinds of needs, the support we need, the access that we need. We are in an A we haven't, I don't think I've mentioned the word AI once yet, which is kind of an oversight on my part, with all of the kinds of things, new technologies that are being introduced, we need to make sure that we're bringing people along and that they have access to the technology and the tools available. And libraries are a great place for providing some of those opportunities. But not every library has equal funding or has the
Right.
ability to provide or meet the needs of their communities. And so we need to be looking out for each other and looking for ways that we can either through some coalitions or other kinds of approaches to band together to see how we can leverage what each has to offer and contribute to help raise all of our interests and help us move things forward. So I think that is a really important aspect. I think that idea of not just collaborating, but thinking creatively about how can we help support and advance our what we're trying to achieve. I
Right.
think we have to be creative and some to think out of the box and not be afraid to try things and see how they work. Not everything's going to work the first time out
No.
of the gate. But that's okay. We can't let that hold us back. That's one of the things I really like about Annie Norman as a person, but also as a leader, is that she is somebody who is like that. And when we all work together as school libraries, public libraries, academic libraries, we coalesce our interests together and we can raise the level of access to information for
Right.
everyone in our state. And through a universal library card or through other kinds of universal access to information. And how powerful is that to be able to help support and raise the interests of your community, to help provide them with the important resources and tools and information they need to be able to thrive and succeed in today's society. And so, but that takes vision, and that takes creativity, that takes passion, that takes imagination, and
Yes, it does.
willingness to take chances and
And
to try things.
What you just talked about in terms of collaboration, creativity, the passion, getting communities together. I think that works its way well into another of the articles that we wanted to talk to you about, the one that Miguel Figueroa and Lessa Pelayo Lozada wrote. The article is called Changing Our How, More Than Seeing Clearly Our What. And it tells us, again, quoting from the book, too often in diversity work, we are more focused on the end goal of a more diverse workplace than on the deeper work of a more inclusive workplace for all people. So would you mind exploring that with us for a bit, talking about the problems that the approach causes and what we can do to overcome it?
That chapter was really important in surfacing some of those ideas of sometimes we just get caught up in like thinking about the immediate goal. Like we need to hire as many diverse people as we can, but they're not thinking about the bigger picture all the time about what do we put in place to ensure that once we've hired these people, how are they going to be successful in this workplace? And how do we make sure that the kinds of supports and infrastructure is there to ensure that everybody's thriving and succeeding and everybody has the full opportunity to be successful and to be thriving? It's not enough to think about how we get there, but it's how do we sustain that inclusivity? And I think that's such an important question, and something that I don't know that we've done the best job of, frankly. And I think there's opportunities for our field and our profession to do better there in terms of the practices that we implement and the kind of policies and approaches that we take. And they talk about a few of these strategies and some of things like, starts with listening and trust building and making sure that you're seeking input from all the voices and your staff, and you're really listening to what they have to say and take that feedback seriously. And it's also about making sure that you're investing in that inclusive leadership development, not just focusing on who you're hiring, but how you're mentoring and how you're supporting and how you're retaining people over time. I think those are really important as well. And Lessa and Miguel also talked a lot about using foresight and forecasting and futures thinking as inclusive collaboration tools, again, to help them support that idea of really listening to your community and using that to help inform your next steps in designing whatever it is you're trying to design, whether it's a more inclusive culture or programs or staff support, to ensure that you're developing and putting in place the changes that need to be made for the future and how to best move forward. So I think that they had a number of really important points to make and some guidance to provide around how do we achieve this more inclusive and supportive environment to ensure that all staff are thriving and have the opportunities they need to be successful.
Sandy, health and wellness is another thing that flows nicely through the book. Former ALA president Loida Garcia-Fabo has a wonderful article on wellness for libraries, and Rebecca Smith-Aldrich's piece on sustainable libraries in 2035 reminds us that our daily challenge, again quoting here, our daily challenge will be to understand and contend with the weight of the future while being purposefully present without succumbing to exhaustion, depression, or hopelessness in the face of aggression and aggrievements of the day. What advice do you and your contributors offer to our students and peers to foster wellness in their workplaces?
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that you brought this out. This was one of the intentional pieces that I included in the book because I really wanted to ensure that I would address some of these topics, and I was pretty sure they were going to address some of them. Especially in today's climate, really, wellness is a concept that isn't a selfish concept. It's really strategic, and that we really have to look out for caring for ourselves and in order to make sure that we're positioned to ensure that we're also caring for our communities. And I think that Rebecca Aldrich Smith, she does a great job of surfacing some of those challenges that we need to be really cognizant of in terms of what our library profession today is encountering in terms of some of the challenges. So it's really important for us to be thinking about creating a space for wellness in our libraries and ensure that we're engaging in wellness practices. I think both from an organizational standpoint and from a personal standpoint, I think organizations like libraries need to be thinking about how they can best be set up to support library staff wellness, and that can engage in mean talking about wellness, inviting conversations around the topic about how we care for ourselves and our community. It can make sure that encouraging people to take their time off, making sure that they take some breaks, just some basic things like that. But I think the idea there is really to keep wellness kind of more at the forefront of our thinking and about its importance. And then it's also important for us to take personal responsibility for wellness for ourselves and making sure that we're practicing sustainable wellness practices for ourselves, and for that will be something that will be different for everyone. For some people it could be journaling or meditation or creative expression or being time out in nature, or just everybody has their own thing. But I think it's important to try to the best of your ability to carve out a little time for yourself every day. It can be really hard, but to really treat it like a professional commitment, because it is really important for us to ensure that we are looking out for ourselves, and by doing so we're also helping us be better connectors with the community too.
It certainly is a great sign of the growth we've seen in training programs as well as our own interest in library systems. 20 years ago, when I was running a training program for San Francisco Public, the idea of doing a yoga class or something else that focused on wellness was so far out in left field, there was just no traction for it. And here we are today, given what our staffs are facing, what we ourselves are facing, recognizing this is something we better do. And as we look toward Library 2035, if we don't do this, we're in a lot of trouble. Before we do a wrap up here, anything we did not ask you about that you think is really important to cover in terms of the book or anything else around Library 2035?
I'm going to mention a couple things really quick. One, actually, I have a new book that I'm working on, and it's a new edited work because I love to edit things apparently. And it's a little bit more scholarly piece that I'm doing. It's called Library and Information Science Education Around the World, Historical Trends, Current Perspectives, and Future Projections. And I'm only at the very beginning stages of inviting the authors at this point. So this is at the very beginning of the process. And I have two colleagues I'm working with internationally who are co-editors. So I haven't worked in a co-editor situation before. So this will be new, but it brings my love for international global perspectives into focus and library and information science education. And we're doing this in honor of the IFLA 50th anniversary of the existence of the section on education and training, of which I'm a member. But back to your question about Library 23 and 2035, I did want to mention, I don't think it came out in this conversation so directly, that I did do a series of webcast interviews with almost all of the Library 2035 contributors. And they were really, they're short and they're just, I think, helpful in terms of amplifying and building upon the perspectives that were included in the book. And in some cases, because I did the interviews maybe about 6 months after they had to submit their manuscript, some of their perspectives shifted a little bit. And it would be really interesting to go back and re-interview them now, year plus after, and given so many more changes have happened, to hear how some of their perspectives may have continued to evolve since the publication of the book. I suspect some of their core tenets won't have changed, things like the importance of the connection to the community, but there may be other things that are maybe some of their tactics or strategies that, or some of our concerns might have evolved since the time of the book publication. So I think that I just wanted to point that out. Those are available on YouTube and they're free, and I think are really complementary to the book.
Thanks again for the reminder that books these days are so much more than what's on the printed page. It's the experience we bring as well as those kind of interviews. And I hope you do some more of those interviews. It'd be lovely to see them. Looking forward to your new book. As we wrap this, I want to thank you again for this wonderfully stimulating conversation. I hope it has a positive impact on those watching it and those who will be hearing about it as we feed this out there. Thank you for joining us. Thanks to the San Jose State University iSchool for making this possible. Our guests, like Dr. Sandra Hirsh, come to us from traditional and non-traditional places. We invite them to share insights and adventures from the field with us. And we hope that it inspires us and you. Join us next time for Information Gone Wild, the podcast where we discuss all things information science. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Pass it on to your friends. Pass it on to their friends' friends. Make sure you don't miss the next one. Have a great day.